to the right, 330. The no's to the left, 275. The ayes have it, the ayes have it.
The most morally challenging pieces of legislation to come before Parliament for years.
Assisted dying.
Historic first step.
Not many parliamentary debates are literally a matter of life and death. Assisted dying is.
Not want somebody trying to coerce me into ending my saying, oh, you poor thing, you know, you're so disabled. Yeah, people say it, and you don't need to hear it.
If an MP told me there's going to be safety measures put in place and amendments to this bill, I would say, have you watched the committee stage? Have you watched them turn down over 100 amendments attempting to strengthen the bill and safeguard against vulnerable people? Have you seen the MPs voting against explicitly excluding people with eating disorders, Down syndrome, or making sure everyone has a specialist palliative care consultation? They promised that they were going to safeguard the bill which was already the strongest in the world, and they're not. They are doing the exact opposite. All they're doing is these cosmetic changes, like someone can have their consultation in Welsh. Fantastic. So Welsh people can die in Welsh. That's not safeguarding against anyone. They're adding these amendments which are not making the bill any stronger or any safer. It's just a show. I mean, if you get a committee which is weighted so heavily with only 8 MPs voting for the safeguards, it's never going to do its job as a committee. It's a waste of everyone's time.
And I think if I was an MP and I thought, well, yeah, you know, I sort of support the principle of assisted suicide, I would be looking very, very carefully at the mechanics of this bill, and I think I would find it worrying.
In the House, they say that we should have far better palliative care. Those same MPs did not bother to turn out for the last report stage, the first report stage, 16th of May. They did not turn out in Parliament to vote on the amendment that would have allowed care homes and hospices to opt out of offering state-facilitated suicide.
I get emotional thinking about the issue of assisted dying. I think disabled people feel very vulnerable in a very real sense in the healthcare system as it is, because they're not secure in the fact that maybe everybody values their lives as much as somebody that's fully able-bodied or fully mentally healthy.
I've worked in hospitals where I've seen people given do not resuscitate forms, and the reason given for those forms is that they have Down syndrome. And this was not even discussed with them or anything like that. They were just told they weren't going to get treatment, basically because they had a disability. Really will have their lives threatened.
A man, 101 years of age, was given a do not resuscitate notice during the pandemic because he was hard of hearing.
Euthanasia can be weaponized and used in the same way, that people who cannot speak for themselves, who cannot decide for themselves, people whose lives are judged by other people to be less worth living, really will have their lives threatened.
We are absolutely terrified of how this might be used against us in the future. As a disabled person, I know that the many doctors that I've seen over the years make a medicalised value judgment about the quality of my life.
330 MPs voted for this bill, which is the exact same number of disability organisations who publicly said, we don't think that this bill protects disabled people.
Belgium extends euthanasia to children.
The introduction of a suicide machine isn't much of a surprise.
COTEC this month allows people from out of state to come to Oregon and get this end-of-life care. Now, previously, you had to be an Oregon resident to qualify, but that's not the case anymore.
A bill expanding access to assisted death has received royal assent. Those who aren't near their natural death now have the right to seek medical assistance in dying.
If we look at every other place where it's legalized, it grows. Not one place have the safeguards been robust enough to stand when people are appealing for assisted suicide for other reasons. So even in Oregon, which the leading organization that campaigns for a change in the assisted suicide laws here it's called Dignity in Dying. It used to be called the Voluntary Euthanasia Society, and they used to always pay attention to Oregon. But of course, it's expanded in Oregon.
Terminal illness includes anorexia, arthritis, diabetes, hernias, which we would not understand to mean that someone is terminally ill, but because they are incurable, or, well, yeah, eating disorders are sometimes put on end-of-life care. These have been reasons that people have had assisted suicides. In Belgium, euthanasia and assisted suicide were legalised in 2002. By the time it was 2014, they'd expanded it to children of all ages could have assisted suicide.
Become the first country in the world to permit euthanasia for terminally ill children of all ages.
Children can't consent to this, so often it was their parents putting them forward for it, which I think is absolutely terrifying. In 2022, a victim of the 2016 Brussels terror attack had an assisted suicide because she was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder and depression. I believe there's only one country which hasn't slid down the slope yet, which is Australia, but that is a very, very recent law, and there is still time for them to go that way. Although there are still horror stories in Australia, I don't think there's any country which has proven itself to work well, and you don't even want to think about ending up in like Belgium, where children can be euthanized or depressed people can end their lives, because right now what we're thinking is it's just going to be terminally ill people with 6 months left to live. It just seems impossible.
Canada's the most egregious example. In 2016, it passed a law to say that death with what they called reasonably foreseeable death, as in somebody's terminally ill, that it was legal to have a euthanasia and or assisted suicide. And in 2020, they expanded that to people with conditions. So they removed reasonably foreseeable from the bill that they were putting through. I believe it was called Bill C7 they put through. And this changed the criteria so that more and more people could actually have euthanasia. But in Canada it expanded, and then they put forward that it's expanding again in 2027 to those who suffer only from mental illness. This has been the most egregious example of how this has expanded and will still expand.
There will be people who are, and we all know them in our lives, shy, who have low self-esteem, who have demons within them. I know those people. I can see them in my mind's eye. They are often poor, they are vulnerable, they are the weakest in our society. And they look to us, they look to Parliament to represent them, to support them, to protect them.
Imagine being in that position where someone you love is trying to spare you distress and chooses assisted dying because they don't want to be a burden. Now, I've looked after my own mother who was dying of cancer. You know, my sister and my brother and I, luckily there was 3 of us, and we took shifts in looking after my mother, and she felt like a burden, and she said it often. And my dad said again and again, let us do this because this will help us when the time comes. This will help us to know that we were there for you the way you've been there for us.
You know, when you look at the reasons that people are choosing euthanasia in other countries or places like Oregon, the overwhelming majority are not choosing it because of physical suffering. It's a small minority that choose it because of even the fear of suffering. It's not even necessarily their actual experience. The main reasons people undergo euthanasia is because they feel like they're a burden.
I'm not convinced that there would ever be enough safeguards to stop people putting pressure on themselves, to stop that voice of oh, what's the point? I'm not going to carry on. It's too much. It's just overwhelming. I might as well just end it now. And as somebody who suffered suicidal ideation myself, and I have been at that point where actually if somebody probably offered me a so-called easy way out, I would have taken it. I just feel that this is an incredibly sinister move, and there is no way of constructing a law that is not going to result in people dying who shouldn't have died. I don't want our society to become anything other than a suicide prevention society. That's what I hope we are at the moment. We are a suicide prevention society.
One of the problems with assisted suicide, and the reason that people have been actually had assisted suicides in the United States and elsewhere, at least 60 around the world, all of them women, and the vast majority of them young women, is that eating disorders, you can bring yourself to a terminal condition. You can bring yourself to death, of course, by refusing to eat and drink. Life is something that you have to actually make an effort to keep up. So if somebody doesn't, then eating disorders can bring you to a terminal condition. And now in the United States, there are psychiatrists, because of course anorexia nervosa and other eating disorders, and what you find is that now there is such a thing as terminal anorexia, which I think is really dangerous because it implies that we're giving up on a patient, that we're saying, you know what, okay, die, we don't mind. The bill committee has refused to consider an amendment that would have actually got rid of that. There was an amendment that would have prevented the doctor from bringing up the subject of assisted suicide, and that was defeated. And I think that's really problematic because, of course, once a doctor brings it up, it becomes a treatment option, and that is something that is going to haunt the person who has had it suggested. They'll think my life is worthless. Even the doctor says so. And I think the problem is if you regard it as a medical treatment, I certainly don't, but the bill committee does, then any good doctor will bring up treatment options. And if you don't ban the doctor from bringing it up, then I think you will have the doctor bringing it up because they feel, well, in this situation, this is a treatment option.
Doreen Chappell died of COVID-19 at an assisted living facility in April. Her son believes she would still be alive had she not been disabled.
Disabled community deserve more.
She tested positive for COVID, and a do not resuscitate order was placed in her medical notes.
We saw with COVID how disabled people and our lives were just not valued at all. If you were somebody with a learning difficulty, you were 16 times more likely to die in the pandemic. And I know from my own experience, I have a fall alarm, and the company that manages that rang me up and asked me no less than 6 times at the beginning of the pandemic, did I want a do not resuscitate order? And I said, no, thank you, I didn't, but they persisted. And I'm quite sure a lot of people just sort of gave in and agreed to it just because of the relentlessness of the pressure of it.
No, I know what happened during COVID. My mum was in the hospital at the time. I was told that my lasting power of attorney meant nothing. At one point it had been revoked, it had not. I was told it was irrelevant. I was told that it was unsafe to feed and give my mum drink. I proved them wrong. My mum survived. They gave her 3 days to live, and she actually lived another 14 months when I got her home. So do I trust the NHS with assisted suicide? No, I don't. We already have assisted dying in the UK, and this has been happening because people have been denied treatment and care, having their medications withdrawn, having food and fluids withdrawn, sedated, and then put on end-of-life drugs. It is managed decline. That is what it is, and it is totally unsafe to bring an assisted suicide.
It's very frustrating that in Britain our MPs seem to think that we're the chosen ones, we're the ones that will get this right, we're the ones that won't be challenged by human rights laws and be forced to expand it. As well-intentioned as it is, there are extremists.
When people have suicidal ideations, we used to meet them with counselling and care. And actually for people with terminal illness and other diseases, we could mitigate that suffering and help them have a better life. And yet now we are seeing that as an appropriate request to die and ending their lives very quickly.
The reason we have palliative care really in the way it is at the moment in the UK is through the work of people like Cicely Saunders, who was opposed to euthanasia but said, look, we have to relieve people suffering at the end of their lives. We can't just kill them. We have to find solutions. And so I think, what euthanasia or assisted suicide actually does is it disincentivizes the provision and also the research into good quality palliative care. And it's because we opposed euthanasia for this long that we actually have that palliative care available to us today. We've seen in other countries where they have euthanasia that palliative care or even just treatments for diseases that might be curable is sometimes not offered because it's too expensive, whereas simply killing someone is much, much cheaper. And so we see a clear trade-off between euthanasia and palliative care. You kind of, to a degree, have to pick one. And so palliative care needs to develop more.
Because palliative care can resolve the kind of issues that people have. And this is why it's all about fear, this whole campaign. It's because people fear a painful death, not unreasonably. Nobody wants to have a painful death. But the key thing is that palliative care can resolve almost all of the problems. As I say, one expert said that 1 in 1,000 deaths that she had seen, and she had seen many thousands, was actually something that she couldn't do anything about. But for all other conditions, there are medical solutions that can alleviate the pain. And I think that's the key thing, is we need better care in those situations. But people shouldn't panic, because of course it's very unlikely that you're going to have a death that's not peaceful. Most deaths are peaceful. It's notable also in areas like Oregon, where it's legal, pain isn't even in the top 5 reasons why people actually opt for it. So it comes behind being a burden. For instance, people worry more about that when they opt for an assisted suicide rather than pain. In Canada, it's not in the top 3. It's, there are other reasons why people take their lives, and many of them are more social than medical.
I know people that work in palliative care in hospices. With the right amount of funding and the right support, there's a myth that they can't help most people. That's rubbish. Like literally, I would say is 99% of people don't need to be in pain at all at the end of life.
Those who campaign for assisted suicide will often say, opponents, they just want to force people to die in pain and suffering. That is not the case. There are so many palliative care specialists who are opposed to this, including Baroness Finlay, who I had a conversation with, and I said, how do you respond to people who say people are going to die in horrible pain, they're going to have fecal vomiting, which is one that's often brought up? She said that's actually very rare, but they will try and use these extreme cases in order to push the bill through. She said that in the vast majority of cases, good palliative care, good pain relief can give someone a good death, and we don't have that in the country right now accessible to all. There are so many rural areas where there aren't hospices, so people are dying at home, they don't have the 24-hour care. There are lots of hospitals where they don't have 24-hour palliative care doctor, so that's why people are dying in pain right now. If we invested the money, which would be spent on killing people, in palliative care and the NHS, people would be dying better at the right time, not prematurely.
We hear all the time from our helpline callers that people are getting palliative care maybe in the last 3 days or in the last week. They need to have that care from the moment they're diagnosed, and that care needs to be invested in. It's just, the money is just not there, and the care is just not there for everybody. Mainly people that are, from ethnic minorities, people that might be poor, who are unable to access this care, and they're given the choice of assisted dying, which is easier and cheaper. The answer is to invest in palliative care. People should have that as the option.
We need to invest in palliative care, invest in good social care. This is the answer, not assisting people to die.
Recently in Scotland, 10,000 people in a year died on waiting lists for cancer while waiting for cancer treatments or diagnosis. Whilst that kind of issue is there, we cannot put through assisted suicide. It's obscene.
We're making a choice as a society, but where do we invest our time and effort and money? Is it in helping people to live, in running towards that person who's on the bridge to save them, to stop them jumping off? Or are we just going to step back and say, oh, it's just more convenient for us if they jump?
What I would say to an MP who is on the fence about this bill is you should try being a disabled person, because we are absolutely terrified of how this might be used against us in the future.
I'd like to ask MPs to think about a situation that they've got. If they know of anyone, either for themselves or for a family or friend who is in this position, just think before you say anything that is detrimental to a person's being able to live and enjoy life. It's precious.
Look, once the door opens to this, it's very difficult to go back. If you're in doubt, the obvious thing to do is to vote no. This debate comes up every few years in Parliament. The problems with this bill are overwhelming. And so we really can see that, this probably will not be the end of the debate. The only way this debate ends is if it goes through and then we start the slippery slope to become a country like Canada or the Netherlands or places where this has gone, is effectively opened Pandora's box. Be cautious. Not even because you necessarily agree in principle, but just because this bill has been handled so poorly with so little scrutiny, and there will be opportunities to debate this and vote on this in future.
What I would say to the MP is you really need to do some thinking about whether we want to move away from being a suicide prevention society, because like it or not, the message that this will send out is that suicide, which is, it's not assisted dying. People aren't dying of natural causes, they're killing themselves. It's assisted suicide. We are sending out the message that suicide is a rational, legitimate choice. And I just can't sign up to that. And everyone I know that works in mental health can't sign up to that. And it's about how we value life.
I would say to every MP who has the slightest doubt, give vulnerable people the benefit of that doubt and vote no to the assisted suicide bill.
I would say pay very close attention to what is happening in the Bill Committee. Pay attention to the fact that it's being pushed through rapidly. It's being rammed through.
If you're considering voting for this bill at third reading as an MP, can you just stop and look around the world and look at all of the horror stories of people dying prematurely? Do you want that to be on your conscience, that vulnerable people are dying because you think that this small minority of people who do have access to all of the good things come first? I would tell you, do not vote for this bill.
I say to all MPs, whatever your personal stance on the principle of assisted suicide is, vote no on this bill. Vote no at third reading. We can return to discuss this, but this is not the bill to introduce assisted suicide in this country.